Hello, my name is Dorothy Sterling, and I'm 23 years old today, which is June 27th, 2015. And I'm speaking with my dad, Lee Sterling, and my mom is listening and interjecting. Her name's Suzanne Sterling, and we're recording an interview in our backyard in Kenmore, Washington. And it's gorgeous.
Okay, so now me.
I guess so.
This is Lee Sterling. I am 52 years old, but in 3 days I will be 53 years old.
Boom.
And I'm Suzanne Sterling, and I'm so much younger because it'll be 3 more months until I'm 53.
Okay, and today we're talking about Mary and Bruce Sterling, which is my grandfather and father of my dad, and the oldest of all the siblings of the Sterling crew that we get to see very shortly. So what is your first memory of your dad?
Pause it.
I can't pause it.
Oh, there's no pausing?
There's no pause button. This is
Oh,
StoryCorps.
okay. StoryCorps.
You just run with it.
Oh, okay.
That's why we had a rehearsal in
Well, we
the
didn't
Whole
really
Foods
have a
parking lot.
rehearsal. That was like a pre-rehearsal
Q&A.
rehearsal.
Go ahead. Just start. Just start talking.
Gosh, first memory. Yeah, first memory is a tough one. But I remember when I was a little kid, like 4 years old, and we were playing me and my siblings were playing croquet in the front yard at 49 East Road, Lamarck, Texas. And we were one of the neighbor kids, one of my best friends, whose name escapes me now. We were all playing croquet, but of course we being 4 years old couldn't
Really play
concentrate
croquet.
on it, and we got bored because we didn't want to wait for our turn, and we decided we would take our croquet mallets and whack this tree with our croquet mallets, and we whacked some of the bark off of it, and it was a pretty small tree. It was probably only about 6 or 7 feet tall. It was one that my dad had planted in the front yard. And then my siblings said, Dad's about to get home from work and you're going to be in big trouble because you smacked his tree and some of the bark is gone. So I got really scared and I ran away and hid in a vacant lot in our neighborhood, and all my siblings were sent out to search for me, and they searched for me and and I decided I was going to run away, and I would never come back to the house. But eventually it was dinner time, so I had to go back to the house, and my dad was there, and he inquired why I decided to beat up the tree, and I was very apologetic, and he did punish me, but he was pretty lenient.
Much more lenient than you thought.
Than I thought,
Yeah.
yes. So that's really the first memory that I have.
I'd say you
him.
passed on that fear somewhat in me. Because when I got I got a C in geometry in 9th grade, and I could have sworn you guys were going to kill me, both of you. I was like, I'm going to die. I told Grandma first because I was so scared. I was like, I got a C in geometry and they're never going to love me again. YOLO. Okay, can you paint a picture of what your dad looked like and what his personality was like?
Yes, he always had the red mustache. Ever since his hair was dark brown, but he had he had a red colored
That's
mustache.
where we get it from.
So and that was very interesting because that doesn't happen. He never colored his hair or anything. But I never saw him without the mustache. He had it the whole time that he was alive.
It was gray by the time I met him, though.
Was it gray?
It was mostly gray,
Gray.
by then. But I always remember it as being red. And he was 5'9", and he was the shortest of his brothers. And so that always bothered him a little bit, being the shortest of his brothers.
The shortest and the oldest?
The shortest and the oldest, yeah. But he would still boss them because he was the oldest. And I think he had a little bit of the short man syndrome. of being, extra bossy because he's short. He had to exert his authority. Yes, I am in charge, even though I'm short.
Yeah.
And he would never let my mother wear high heels. No, she never really wanted to, I don't think, because she was only an inch shorter than him.
5'8".
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was 5. Actually, he was 5'10", and she was 5'9".
Okay.
So she always wore flats because she didn't want to be taller than him. What was his personality like?
Yeah.
Well, his personality
Other
was
than
like a
short man
firstborn
syndrome.
child. He was always in charge. He was, what he said went, and that's the way it goes. But he was fair with people, and he could be very gentle, especially as he got older. He mellowed out a lot, and he became much more sentimental about family life in his later years.
What did you tell me about the sentiment that he had? That you were like, why are you sentimental about this?
Oh yeah, when we were growing up, when I was like 10 years old or beforehand, we would get calves from the farm and have them slaughtered. That would be our beef that we would have, and we would split it with the Ferricks, and we would slaughter a calf, and they would get half, and we would get half. But by the time that he was older and he had retired from his job at the refinery and he was a full-time farmer, he wouldn't have any. He couldn't have any of his cows slaughtered to use as beef because he knew them. It's like they each had their own name and their own personality, and he couldn't stand to eat them. So he'd eat other people's cows, but not his own.
That's right. That's what you said. Okay, if Grandpa were here today, what would you ask him?
I would ask him if he's still a Republican, because the Republican Party has just totally gone off the deep end. They really have.
Yeah.
And so, because I used to be a Republican too. I used to be, I was my father's son. I was a young conservative and all that, but I've.
And you met Mom.
Well, that may be part of it, but also the Republican Party changed. They became much more drastic in the way they're approaching things. I mean, Nixon opened the door to China, and what have the last Republican presidents done? Gone to war for no particular reason. They've just gone crazy. So that's what I would ask him.
And what is your most vivid memory of your dad? Not the first one, but the best, I guess the best one, the most one that sticks out in your mind when you think about him.
I think about him in the hospital after the aircraft accident, really. That's my most vivid memory, I guess, because that was a very painful time in our lives, and it was just him and me.
Yeah.
And so, when he was laid up and he had burned his feet in the airline accident, because he got airsick. I didn't get airsick. He got airsick. And he always, when he took his shoes off, because it makes him, it made him more comfortable if he had his shoes off. And so he had his shoes off, and after the wreck, he had to walk through the burning wreckage in his sock feet, and his bottoms of his feet got very badly burned. And so I remember that he had his feet elevated in the hospital bed, and I was ambulatory. I had a broken arm and a broken leg, but I could walk around, and he couldn't.
Do you remember
And he was very depending on me. Conversations with him during that time, we were just waiting for Bruce to come back from the University of Texas. He was on his way as soon as he found out. But it took a long time in those days to fly halfway around the world.
Did they let you stay in the room with him? Did they let you guys stay together?
Yeah, we stayed together.
That's really sweet, because they used to have rules I guess I'm glad they let you stay together, because sometimes they're really strict about that.
Well, we had our own it was kind of a private hospital that we got moved to. And then we could kind of make our own rules, because they kind of felt sorry for us.
That's understandable. How do you think Grandpa wants to be remembered?
I think he wants to be remembered as a guy that accomplished a lot of good in the world. I remember when your Uncle Bruce gave his eulogy at his funeral, and he talked about how back in the 70s people were talking about, there was going to be mass starvation in India, and there was the coming population bomb. It's going to happen in the late 70s, and there was going to be massive millions of people dying from famine around the world, and that never happened. And part of it was because of him. He was the plant manager at this plant that made fertilizer in India that started the Green Revolution right then, and India became self-sufficient, and they are to this day, in making their own food. They revolutionized their agriculture thanks a lot, in fact, to fertilizer. In fact, they export food now, and it all started with him back in the day. And then when he retired from that job, then he became a farmer, and he planted all those trees, and those trees are still there today, still making pecans, delicious pecans.
Yeah, they
and
are.
They're going to be there for decades to come, making great things for people to eat. Who knows how many people have
food is
enjoyed the
good.
pecans that he planted.
And the beef from the cows from the generations of cows that he raised,
Exactly.
too. Yum.
So that's how we want to be remembered, as somebody that did something good.
And he provided
For the
for a
world.
bunch of people. Mom and I found a picture of him right before you guys were leaving India, and he helped someone you knew with a business, opening a business.
Right, yes. One of our servants that we had in India, George, he was our driver and all-around go-to guy. He did all sorts of things for us. When we left, he went to my parents and said, well, you're leaving, and I don't have my job is going with you. And so they bought a bicycle rental business for George and his brother and set them up in business before we left. They bought like 25 bicycles and forwarded money for them to have the place for them to set up the bicycle business, and set him up in a business so he could be an entrepreneur after they left, and he wouldn't have to be a servant anymore.
Cool.
I think that's the best. Okay. And do we have any traditions to honor Grandpa? Like, is there anything that we do that's kind of like, besides eating the pecans, because we do that every year.
I do. I've planted trees in all sorts of states and all sorts of...
Everywhere that we've lived,
I've planted trees.
And you go and visit them, too.
Yes, I go and visit them.
And when
see
other people
how
go, you
they're
say,
doing.
Dorothy, take a picture of the house we lived in when you were 6.
Right.
But I actually remembered when we were there in Lake Charles. It was so weird. It was like, I didn't remember the street at all. Like, when we were turning to get there, I didn't remember it. But when we got there, I was like, this looks really familiar. It was like really weird.
And you hadn't been there since you were in kindergarten.
No, not since kindergarten, which was a long time ago. Okay, so all these trees. What's your favorite tree that you've planted that you can remember?
I planted a ginkgo in the backyard at Fort Worth, and I'm really wondering how that one's looking right now. I planted another one right here.
Yeah, this one looks pretty good.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice.
Looks happy right now. Okay, do you have any favorite stories you want to share about Grandpa?
I thought I just shared a bunch.
You did, but I had another question. I'm just kidding. Only if you can think of one later. And are you comfortable talking about how he died and his death and what he kind of was like at the end of his life?
Yeah, I am comfortable talking about that. I do want to talk about that because it was really, really brutal. Because he got pancreatic cancer, but it was misdiagnosed for a long time, and it created some, I believe some of it broke off and lodged in his brain, and he had all sorts of issues. He couldn't think properly. He always wrote, and he had carried a diary. He had a diary that he wrote every day in at the farm. Hey, today it rained such and so, or this calf did this, or I planted this tree, or whatever it happened at the farm that day. He wrote, and when he was becoming ill, he started everything in there started getting negative. He started feeling, he just became totally depressed, and it's like, this is terrible stuff is happening today. We're going to run out of money. I'm going to have to sell the farm. All these horrible things were happening, and that wasn't his nature, because his nature was to be very optimistic and sunny and happy about life in general. He loved life, you know. He was a happy person until he became ill. And he didn't even realize what was happening to him. When we were visiting him, he got committed to a psychiatric hospital because nobody could figure out what was happening, and they were talking about shock treatment and all sorts of stuff, and nobody knew that he had pancreatic cancer. And they finally, and he didn't, you know, he knew who we were, but he didn't know why he was where he was, and he couldn't figure out what was going on, and he was losing a ton of weight. He wasn't, but that was the cancer, you know.
Yeah, that makes
when you
sense.
have the cancer,
with the
you
insulin
don't.
and everything.
So it was really, really hard until they finally figured out that he had pancreatic cancer, and of course there wasn't any. It was well advanced by the time they figured it out, and there wasn't anything they could do. So it just became about hospice at that point. But he had moments of lucidity in there in his last. It lasted almost a whole year, and that was really hard going and, you know, visiting. That was when you were little, and, you know, and we were living in different city, and, you know, we didn't had my job, and we didn't have lots of time to go and visit, but we still would go.
Yeah.
And he would always be happy to see me, but, you know, and he always recognized me. But
That's good.
it was really, really hard toward the end on Arlene, because, you know, he was just wasting away, and he just wasted away. He went from being, you know, he had a nice little pot belly at the age of, you know, 65, and then by the time of age of 67, when he died, he was like 90 pounds.
Yeah.
He lost like 100 pounds of weight over that year period.
That's really
and it was
hard.
really, and became less and less lucid, and it was very difficult. She did really, really, I mean, she had some superhuman strength to be able to handle that. And he died in hospice. He was under hospice care, but it was at the farm. It was at his own home that he had designed and had built, and so that was really fortunate and a good thing for him.
I didn't know that he died at home. That's really good. I'm really happy that they made that happen for him. Because people dying at hospitals is just the pits. It's just the worst. Okay. What were Grandpa's hopes and dreams for all of us, like his children and Arlene and everyone?
I think he was just happy. He was like all parents. He wanted to be a grandparent. And so
Hint.
He was happy that his remaining kids, you know, he lost 2 kids when they were teenagers, and that's really, 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 really hard. But his other 2 kids, his oldest one, they said this was been the peak of the Cold War, and that's like, we're never going to have children and bring them in the Cold War, because all they're just going to do is get blown up in nuclear winter, and it's not worth anything, and, you know, and the world is horrible. And then, of course, the Cold War ended, and they had
Me?
Michael Bruce had 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up having 2 children, and then yes, I got married and had 2 children who he lived to see. He didn't get to see you grow up, but he got to know that you were born, and that made him very happy. He was happy that I was happy, and he was happy to have grandchildren, and he knew that I would be a good dad.
Facts. That happened too. Just on record. Just putting that on record. And what were your mom and dad like when you were growing up? And do you have any stories from your childhood about them? And you should probably tell everyone how they met, because it's super cute. And I didn't know this story until like last week. No lie.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I thought Aunt Dorothy had told you.
I'm sure she did, but I'm sure
You
Aunt
were
Dorothy told
younger.
me, but
You
I
were
was younger,
younger.
so I forgot.
Yeah.
I had forgotten.
Well, what is your memory, Suzanne, of that how they met? What did Aunt Dorothy tell you?
Boom.
Well, Aunt Dorothy being the one who introduced us.
Uh-huh.
told me the story of how she was important in introducing them too. That Bibi was her friend, and Bruce was away at war in Korea, and Bibi was at nursing school, and they wrote for a long time, but I don't remember.
Did you know we have all their love letters, Dad, downstairs?
Yes, I know.
Yes.
Yes,
And your dad curses a lot.
I know. Philip was reading them the other day.
He says hell like 5 times in each letter.
Damn it.
Yeah, and damn it.
Well, he was
but all
20.
in kind of a cute
That's
little
true.
way, yeah. I mean,
Daddy says Norma was friends with Bruce, too.
oh, okay.
Right.
And Bibi was friends with Dorothy. And that's how
Yeah.
all that happened.
Norma
okay.
and Dorothy were friends.
Norma and
then-
Dorothy and,
Yeah,
they all were friends.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad said that Norma was like, oh, my little sister has Gloria has a crush on you. And Grandpa was like, oh, she does. And Norma was like, yeah. Didn't you know that or whatever? And then he went off, and then he joined the Army instead of getting called in. And then he was like, I need someone to write to, and can I write to you? And she was like, of course you can write to me. And then that's how they fell in love. It's through writing letters to each other while he was in Korea.
So I guess those letters are going to be really interesting and form a story.
Yeah, there's a ton, though. There's like over 100 letters.
So
I also read a bunch of letters that Bibi sent to her parents that Granny gave me about when you guys were little. When you were little and they called you Bubba and Bubby.
Bubby.
Yeah.
Bubby, not Bubba. Bubby.
Just
It's
Bubby.
always Bubby.
There's Bubby's pickles that are really good. You need to try them.
Anyway,
I know
some
your
of the stories
namesake.
about
Sorry,
him
but
or her.
the best part's when you go off the question.
Well, I have a story about her
Okay, go.
when, I probably told you this one, when we lived in India, she was the
And
nurse.
she gave you shots?
She gave us shots, yes. We would get the Houston Chronicle once a month, and it was delivered by ship.
Nice.
So it was a month late. So we would get the March Houston Chronicle in April, and of course we were always looked forward to the funnies, and we knew it was time. It's like we would break them out on Sunday mornings, and so here's Sunday mornings when you would go through the newspaper and the funnies were missing. You knew that was trouble, because in order to read the funnies, you had to go up to Mom's bedroom. And she would be there with
the funnies.
with the syringe and the funnies. You get to read the funnies after you get your shot. And so, yes, we would get, I think I had to get 5 cc's of gamma globulin, and the older kids had to get 10 cc's of gamma globulin.
Ow, oh my
and
gosh.
That's a lot.
Oh my
That's
gosh,
a lot.
that's so much.
And
I
it goes in your backside.
Oh.
So at least you
Your
can't
butt's
see
gonna
it
be
coming.
sore for like a week after that.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes, but you had to do it because there were a lot of tropical diseases and stuff that you had to deal with living in India. So that's my story about her. Of course, she died when I was 10, so, I remember a lot of things that were like, she was pretty stern about stuff, She had 4 kids, so everything had to be, just so.
And she was
wasn't-
married to your dad.
Yeah, she wasn't laissez-faire about stuff. It was like things had to be ship-shape,
She sounds like a badass.
She wasn't like Aunt Dorothy, let's put it that way. They were great friends, but they had different personalities.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I'm a nurse like her, even though she wasn't one for very long. But
Oh, once a nurse, always a nurse.
that's true, very true. Okay. Any last words about Grandpa
What's
before
the
we
next
shut this
question?
down?
There may
This
be
is
an-
it.
oh,
That's
the
it.
last
That
question?
was it.
Oh, okay.
But this is everything that
I wanted to make sure we covered all the questions. in
all the
allotted
questions are
time.
covered, and you have 6 minutes if you wish. But we can shut it down whenever you want. And Lisa's going to listen to all this, so.
I have another one. Like, what do you know about
I
your
have
dad's
a dad
relationship
story.
with his, with his siblings,
Siblings,
or stuff
yeah.
about when he was growing up that he told you lessons he learned from his parents or something.
He didn't ever talk about that much. He talked about the time that he got in the slingshot Chinaberry fight, and that's how he lost partial vision in one of his eyes. And that was, his brothers were involved in that, but that was like a big war. Probably one of them knows more about it than I do. I should ask them when we come up to the reunion.
The slingshot Chinaberry War?
Yes.
Of what year?
I don't
know. How old was he?
He was probably in his early teens.
Nice.
But I'm not sure exactly.
So the 30s? 40s? That's probably around the time that they had the slingshot Chinaberry War.
Yeah. So yeah, I do have one more. When he was, when my dad was getting older, like right before he got pancreatic cancer, he might have already had it. He became more and more sentimental as time went by, and he worked really, really hard when I was a kid growing up. He was a manager at the plant in Texas City, and there were multiple strikes, and he would be working 12-hour, 16-hour, 18-hour days, and we would go for a week or two and maybe see him coming and going, but that was, barely see him. And when he did the plant startup in India, it was the same thing, and when he did the plant startup in Trinidad, it was the same thing. So really, and I saw him, when we went to the farm on the weekends, I saw lots of him because we were working together. It's like, get up, we're going to go work, But later on, when he became more sentimental, and he was kind of disappointed that I got a government job when I got out of college. It's like, government job. But later on, it's like, maybe that government job was not a bad thing because you got to spend a lot more time with your kids growing up than I got to spend with my kids when they were growing up. And maybe you did the right thing and I didn't do the right thing. But we each have our own paths, and his. It was a nice profession. He got to retire early. He got to enjoy 10 years at the farm before he became sick, and he really enjoyed those years. Mm-hmm. And he had enough money to where he could send his kids to college and never worry about how we're going to pay for it or anything. So all my college was paid for. He was able to help us out. And so, we owe a lot, all of us, we too owe a lot to, Amoco Oil Corporation for sponsoring, what we have today. Mm-hmm. And he also, by living in foreign countries, established my love of travel, which I still have, an incredible love for travel today. And I passed it on to you, and you have it too.
I'm going to go to Australia next year, I've decided.
There you go.
And Fiji, probably, too.
Okay.
Sorry, not sorry. Because you guys are going to Europe, so.
All right, that's the end of the interview.
Okay. We're all signing out. Say goodbye.
Bye.
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 Bye. Here's the bird.